a fierce battle took place between the strongest mage of the White Tower and a horde of demons from the demonic realm. The demons were under the command of a high-ranking evil priest, while the White Tower was led by Oscar Sage, a level 9 mage and the respected master of the Mage Tower. With the support of his disciples, Oscar managed to defeat the demons, but the price of victory was steep. Countless disciples perished, and Oscar himself suffered a fatal wound to the heart. In his final moments, he entrusted Edna with the care of his remaining disciples. Despite his incredible magical prowess, he believed he had failed as a leader. Regret weighed heavily on him as he took his last breath, and his name became legend. But this was not the end of his story. Somehow, Oscar found himself alive again, waking up in a body that was not his own 20 years into the future. As he regained consciousness, a soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh earth. He sat up too quickly, accidentally knocking over his caretaker, who had been holding a bowl of water. The poor man was drenched, clearly frustrated by the unexpected mess. He had been the one looking after Oscar all this time, and certainly didn't deserve this treatment. All he had wanted to do was change the bed linens. He muttered under his breath, annoyed at Oscar's poor sleeping habits, warning that he wouldn't continue looking after him if things didn't change. Meanwhile, Oscar's mind was in turmoil. He had been certain he was dead. His heart had been pierced after all. His last memories were of the battlefield, of pain and darkness. So why was he here? Before he could make sense of anything, the door burst open without warning. A man stormed in without so much as a knock, his temper barely contained. It was Elder Maxim, Oscar's former teacher. Frank, the caretaker, attempted to calm him, but Maxim wasn't in the mood to listen. He was furious and determined to discipline Oscar for his shortcomings. However, both men were caught off guard when Oscar, still dazed, questioned why he was even alive. Maxim found the statement amusing, considering how useless Oscar had been in the past. Despite the confusion, Oscar recognized Maxim's robes belonging to a mage of the White Tower. His instincts took over, and he demanded an explanation about his current situation. Maxim, however, was not the kind of person to tolerate being ordered around, especially by someone he viewed as an incompetent fool. His patience snapped, and he raised his hand to strike Oscar. Oscar, relying on his old instincts, cast a protective spell to shield himself from the blow. He expected the magic to stop Maxim in his tracks, perhaps even injure him, proving that attacking him was a mistake. But to his shock, the shield vanished the moment it formed. Panic set in as he realized something was terribly wrong. His magic was weaker than expected. Fortunately, even the weak barrier was enough to make Maxim hesitate. The elder pulled back his hand, observing Oscar with newfound interest. At least the boy was still capable of magic, even if it was unimpressive. Satisfied that Oscar wasn't entirely useless, Maxim decided to delay any punishment for misusing research funds and instructed him to focus on recovering instead. After Maxim left, Frank wasted no time scolding Oscar for his reckless behavior. But Oscar barely heard him. His mind was racing, analyzing what had just happened. His mana reserves, magical circuits, and spell-casting abilities were all in complete disarray. He needed to figure out what had happened to his body. Finally, breaking out of his thoughts, he turned to Frank and asked for the date. Frank didn't hesitate to answer. It was the 21st of September. Oscar was trying to make sense of everything. He clearly remembered fighting the evil priest on April 28th, which meant he had been out for 5 months. But then Frank casually told him he'd only been unconscious for a single day. That answer threw him off completely. It just didn't add up. Without wasting time, Oscar told Frank to get in touch with someone who could explain what was happening. Lloyd, or if he wasn't available, Gila or Sasha. Frank's reaction was odd. He seemed confused, like Oscar had just mentioned people who no longer existed, and then it hit him. Lloyd, Gila, and Sasha weren't who they used to be. Lloyd had walked away from the White Tower and aligned himself with a rival faction. Gila had stolen a forbidden magic book and vanished. Sasha, on the other hand, had taken on a new role, becoming the Mage Tower Master. The mention of traitors annoyed Oscar. So he replied he would become only the Master of Mercy Guard. These weren't criminals. They were his old comrades, and he refused to believe they had turned their backs on everything. Still, Frank wasn't lying. There was no hesitation in his voice. That meant Sasha really was the Mage Tower Master. But how? Sasha was just a kid. How could a 5-year-old suddenly hold such a high-ranking position? Then came another bombshell. Sasha wasn't 5 anymore. She was 25. Oscar's mind was spinning. None of this was making any sense. He turned to the window, hoping to clear his thoughts, but what he saw in the reflection stopped him cold. The face staring back wasn't his. That's when the biggest realization hit him. He wasn't in his own body. Somehow he had woken up 20 years in the future, and in those 20 years, the world had completely changed. Technology had advanced in ways he couldn't have imagined. Magic had evolved alongside industry, leading to breakthroughs that made life easier. There were things like electricity, machines, and other inventions that simply didn't exist before. Looking around, Oscar felt something unexpected, a sense of excitement. His old friends would have loved to see this world. Back when everything was falling apart, all they had was despair. But now there was hope. Of course, there were more pressing matters to deal with, like figuring out whose body he was stuck in. The guy's name was also Oscar Kian. Apparently, he had been taken into the White Tower at the age of 10 and was now 20 years old, a level 1 mage from a fallen noble family. The guy had a decent face at least, no complaints there, but his magic? Absolute garbage. Still, being level 1 at his age was just sad. As for how this Oscar ended up in this state, it was pretty simple. He got greedy. He embezzled research funds to buy a shady elixir, hoping to boost his magic reserves. If it had worked, he would have seen a massive increase in power. But since the elixir was illegal, there was always a risk. Turns out, it didn't work. Instead, it knocked him out cold and put his life in danger. No wonder the guy collapsed. Now, stuck in this weak body, Oscar had one goal: figure out what was going on and make the most of this second chance. Frank had warned that taking that stuff would knock someone out for an entire day. If that was true, then the original owner of this body should have already been dead from a mana overload. But something felt off. This body had way too much mana for a beginner mage. Not just that, it was raw, untouched mana, completely unrefined. There is no way all of this happened just because of some sketchy black market potion. The previous owner of this body had downed that stuff, and now something strange was happening. A dark sludge began forming inside him, gathering in the center of his chest. Before he could even react, it started moving. It slithered through his veins, creeping toward his fingertips before finally dripping onto the ground. The second it touched the floor, the surface sizzled and melted away. Poison. At first, Oscar didn't get why something like that was inside him, but then it all made sense. That illegal potion? It wasn't fake. It was the real deal, something only the rich could normally afford, but it had been laced with poison. That meant the previous owner of this body didn't die from an out-of-control mana surge. He was assassinated. And this wasn't just any ordinary poison. It was way too strong for a low-level mage. Whoever had planned this wanted to make sure the job was done. If Oscar hadn't taken over this body, no one would have ever figured out what really happened to the poor guy. There was still the mystery of who was behind the attack, but that could wait. For now, there was something to be grateful for. He had gotten another shot at life, something he had desperately wished for before his own death. This time, he wasn't going to waste it. He swore to rebuild the White Tower to its former greatness. More importantly, he was finally going to live life on his own terms, something he never had the chance to do before. But before any of that, there was one thing he couldn't ignore: payback. The least he could do for the original owner was make sure the people responsible for his death got what they deserved. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a nervous lackey was reporting to his boss. The store had been completely trashed. Apparently, a maid was the one responsible for all the destruction. The boss, already drunk, lost his temper. Who would dare attack his business? The lackey hesitated before finally revealing that the person responsible was the one who had bought the illegal potion, and that meant it had to be Oscar. The boss found that hard to believe. Oscar was just a weak, beginner-level mage. There was no way he could have survived that poison, let alone caused that kind of damage. The lackey, however, was more worried about something else. If the White Tower got involved, things could get messy, especially if they discovered who had given Oscar the poison. But surprisingly, the boss didn't seem too bothered. He had his reasons. After all, the person who ordered Oscar's poisoning had been wearing a White Tower ring. Before they could continue, both the boss and the lackey froze in shock. Standing right in front of them, very much alive, was Oscar, and he had heard every single word they had just said. Tracking them down had been simple. The potion bottle had left behind a faint scent, and Oscar had followed it straight to them. But after hearing their conversation, he realized the conspiracy against him ran way deeper than he had initially thought. It was going to be a pain to deal with, but there was no choice. This had to be handled. The boss, trying to act tough, demanded to know if Oscar was the one who had wrecked the store. Oscar didn't bother denying it. He was actually more interested in hearing more about what these two idiots had just been discussing, so he told them to keep talking. The boss wasn't having it. At first, he had considered letting Oscar walk away, but now he wanted him dead. Without hesitation, he ordered his lackey to get rid of Oscar. The lackey obeyed instantly, charging straight at him. Realizing that words weren't going to get him anywhere, Oscar decided to let his magic do the talking. He raised his hand and cast a wind spell. A sharp current of air cut straight through the lackey's neck, severing his head clean off. The boss stood there, eyes wide in shock, as his minion dropped lifelessly to the ground. Panic set in. In desperation, the boss pulled out a weapon, a small but powerful device that fired metal projectiles. He aimed and fired, expecting Oscar to dodge or fall. But Oscar didn't move. Instead, he casually cast a protective barrier. The bullets stopped in midair, frozen before they could even reach him. Oscar eyed the weapon curiously. He had never seen anything like it before. It was fascinating how something so small could produce that kind of force. The boss, on the other hand, was losing his mind. His strongest weapon had done absolutely nothing, and now he was trapped with a very angry Oscar staring him down. Oscar doesn't waste any time. With a flick of his hand, he twists the air, sending the bullets right back at the boss. They tear through him, and he collapses to the ground, completely helpless. Just to make things clear, Oscar lets him know that his goons aren't coming to save him. Not now, not ever. The boss struggles to understand how a low-level mage could pull off such a high-level spell. He assumes it must be silence magic, but Oscar corrects him. It's not silence, it's something called sound bind. Basically, all the noise is trapped inside the room, making it impossible for sound to escape. But enough about that. Oscar has questions, and if this guy doesn't start talking, things are going to get a lot worse for him. The first thing Oscar wants to know is who set him up. The boss, or rather the shop owner, refuses to answer, which earns him a swift, brutal kick to the face. Oscar has to give him credit for sticking to his pride, but that won't stop him from cranking up the pain. He channels wind magic directly into the man's body, making it feel like countless tiny needles are stabbing him from the inside. Oscar isn't one to enjoy torture, but if that's what it takes to get answers, so be it. Eventually, the guy can't take it anymore. He groans, writhing on the ground, his face twisted in agony. He finally caves, promising to spill everything if Oscar eases up. Oscar gives him a break, eager to hear what he has to say. The shop owner explains that some mysterious figure gave them the potion and some money, instructing them to sell it to Oscar at a dirt cheap price. The only reason they took the job was because saying no wasn't an option. As for what the mastermind looked like, they couldn't say. The guy had his face hidden under a hood, but one thing stood out. He was wearing a White Tower ring. That detail immediately raises a red flag for Oscar. It's too obvious. The hooded man probably wore that ring on purpose to mislead them. Thinking fast, Oscar asks if the shop owner noticed anything else, like a particular scent. The answer? A fresh, clear smell. Something like mint. That's enough for Oscar to start piecing things together. Now, there's another thing bugging Oscar. How did the shop owner think he'd get away with murder? The man admits that he figured the White Tower wouldn't bother investigating. They were too preoccupied with the withdrawal from the 4 major magic towers to waste time on something like this. That catches Oscar's attention. He needs to know more. The shopkeeper seems surprised that Oscar, a member of the White Tower, isn't already aware of the situation. Oscar plays it off, claiming memory loss from the potion. Buying the excuse, the shopkeeper hands over a stack of documents containing crucial details. Oscar flips through the pages, taking in everything. The White Tower's current situation is worse than he thought. According to the papers, April 28th is recognized as the Day of White Night, a day of mourning for the high priest who died long ago. In honor of his sacrifice, the emperor grants significant benefits to the White Tower, including a 30-year tax exemption. But despite this advantage, the White Tower has been struggling. Among all the magic institutions, it performed the worst last year. Ever since its downfall 2 decades ago, it hasn't managed to recover. Now, an important announcement from the imperial family is set to be made at the upcoming White Night Festival. Experts believe the biggest issue holding the White Tower back is its lack of advanced magic. If that's true, the future of the White Tower is looking grim. Oscar is shocked to learn that the White Tower has no advanced magic. He clearly remembers handing important documents to Edna to prevent this very situation. Then he reads one last note that states, "The White Tower has the worst financial results among the magic towers." Curious, he asks what kind of businesses the other towers are involved in. The shopkeeper explains that the Yellow Tower of the East, known for lightning magic, sparked a new era of magical engineering. They introduced groundbreaking inventions like powered vehicles and illuminated streets. The Blue Tower of the South dominates the market for potions, clean water, and agriculture. The Red Tower, which thrives in the desert, has aligned itself with the military, assisting in dangerous missions like monster hunting. Then comes the White Tower, and what Oscar hears leaves him speechless. It turns out the White Tower is mostly known for delivery services. Completely baffled, Oscar asks what that means. The shopkeeper elaborates. The White Tower runs the postal system, and thanks to its wind riders who can fly, they excel at fast and secure deliveries. Oscar is furious. The mages of the White Tower were once known as fearless warriors of the skies, compared to legendary creatures like dragons and eagles. To think their legacy has been reduced to delivering packages is beyond humiliating. If he could track down the person responsible for this decision, he would personally make them pay. But to his horror, he learns that the one who chose this path was none other than the current White Tower master, his own former disciple. Trying to shake off his frustration, Oscar focuses on the Blue Tower's business model. He understands why potions are profitable, but he doesn't get why they are involved in the drinking water and agriculture industries. The shopkeeper explains that the Blue Tower has monopolized the potion market. On top of that, they sell clean water at outrageous prices and control the rainfall in drought-stricken areas. Hearing this only adds to Oscar's disappointment. 20 years ago, the White Tower was in the magical world. Everyone knew from the start that this guy was a genius. The expectations on him were sky high, and during his 6 years at the magic faculty of the Empire Academy, he was so good that different groups fought over who could recruit him. He never got anything less than perfect grades. His final thesis was so impressive that it proved beyond a doubt how brilliant he was. But one thing really confused him. Why was Oscar Kian still stuck at the very bottom, unable to progress past level 1? It didn't make sense, especially when Oscar seemed to understand magic better than anyone. It wasn't until he read something about Oscar's condition that things started to click. Oscar Kian had a rare illness called mono-deficiency syndrome. This illness prevented him from using magic to his full potential, even though he had the raw talent to be one of the greatest mages of his time. This realization hit him hard. It explained everything. Oscar wasn't stuck because of a lack of understanding. He just couldn't use his magic because of his condition. But that wasn't the end of the story. After checking, Oscar had always been on his own, trying to untangle the mess that was his life, much like how our boy feels now. He's confident that if he focuses, he can figure out the puzzle and solve it without much trouble. While searching through some of Oscar Crushen's old notes, he comes across a few thick books filled with everything the genius had studied: his research, his observations, his experiments. One book in particular grabs his attention. It's titled A New Look at Magic Fundamentals. As he flips through it, he finds pages filled with annotations, notes, and scribbles. Oscar's attempts to understand magic on a deeper level. The book dives into new ways to apply spells and maximize their power, suggesting alternate methods for spells and how to make magic more efficient. One chapter even discusses a weapon and compares it to magic. As he reads, it hits him. Many of the advanced wind spells that Oscar wrote about were nearly identical to the ones he uses now. But what really stands out is how Oscar approached magic. He didn't stick to just one way of doing things. Instead, he explored how magic could be adapted to fit different situations. Oscar's research was far from conventional, and even though he couldn't use magic himself, he conducted these mental experiments, testing theories and pushing boundaries. Now it all makes sense. Oscar Crushen was a genius, no doubt about it. As our boy reads through the pages, he finds a deep connection with Oscar's thoughts, as if they shared the same mindset. It's clear that Oscar didn't give up on magic. Despite his struggles, he worked harder than anyone, constantly refining his understanding of it. There's even a quote in the book where Oscar expresses his hope that his work will one day bring. Julian Dominic, a lively 7-year-old boy with golden hair, is super excited about learning a type of magic that makes things move faster. He thinks slow stuff is boring, so he's eager to get his hands on some speed magic. However, Oscar, his teacher, points out that it's not as simple as picking any magic type. Everyone is born with a natural affinity for a particular type of magic called Sasha, and it's something you can't just choose. Curious, Jillian wonders how anyone would know what type of magic they're born with. Oscar, being the experienced teacher, shows them a simple way to find out. He draws a small magical circle on the ground and asks Jillian to extend his finger and try to activate the spell written inside it. Jillian hesitates at first, because it's his first time seeing a spell like this, but he tries anyway. As he focuses, magical energy starts flowing from his finger. Oscar observes that the mana isn't too wild or dangerous, it's well balanced, so Oscar tells him he's got a harmonization magic type. Jillian is overjoyed, as it's the same type as his teachers. The rest of the group starts testing their magic types too. It turns out Jillian got the speed magic he wanted, which makes him jump for joy. He's so happy he can't contain himself. Meanwhile, another student, Lloyd, discovers that his mana takes the shape of a beautiful flower, indicating that he has a rare, special type of magic. Lloyd, a bit shy, asks if it's possible to change his magic type after it's been decided. Oscar is confused by this question. Special type magic is extremely rare, with only a couple of people out of 1,000 having it, but Lloyd wants a balanced type like his teacher. Oscar, with a teasing smile, tells him that while he'll look into the possibility of changing his type, he's also thinking of giving Lloyd extra attention because of his rare magic. This thought excites Lloyd even more, as he loves being in the spotlight. Oscar reassures Lloyd that special type magic is indeed valuable, and that he'll be getting extra lessons since people with special types usually need more guidance to improve. After hearing this, Lloyd decides that having a special magic type isn't so bad after all. The two seal their promise with a pinky swear, marking the moment as a memorable one for Lloyd. Oscar watches this whole scene unfold, feeling a bit sentimental. He remembers how Lloyd had earned the nickname Promise Man for his love of keeping promises. Just as he's enjoying the moment, a loud announcement cuts through the air, summoning him to a specific lab. On his way there, Oscar reflects on his progress. He's unlocked 12 of his 20 physical circuits and has gained 2 additional mana circuits, making him a level 2 mage now. Once he reaches the lab, he finds Elder Maxim waiting for him. Maxim, who's known Oscar since they were younger, asks how Oscar's been doing. Oscar confirms that his memories are returning, and Maxim is happy to hear that things are going well. A bit about Maxim. He used to be Oscar's junior back in the day, but now, at 45, he's an elder in the White Tower. He joined the tower long after Oscar, but time has brought him up to this important position, and he's known for being honest and hardworking. Oscar always thought highly of Maxim, his former junior. He recalls how Maxim used to follow him around, always showing respect and addressing him as senior. Seeing Oscar lost in thought, Maxim asks what's making him smile, but quickly moves on to more pressing matters. He brings up 2 recent deaths, the leader of a powerful family and their acting head. Maxim wonders if Oscar knows anything about it. Oscar casually responds that he doesn't have much to say, but he does know there's a good reason for their deaths. Then he drops a bombshell. Both men had tried to kill him. He explains that the elixir they gave him was poisoned, and the commission fees and a ledger he found at the leader's house serve as proof of their plans. As Maxim connects the dots, he realizes Oscar's recent health issues must have been caused by the poisoning attempt. Oscar confirms this, telling him that when he confronted them, they tried to kill him, but he managed to defend himself and came back with the proof. The ledger had all the details of their contract for the assassination. Maxim understands and assures Oscar that the incident will be considered self-defense, so he won't be accused of murder. Oscar is relieved. With that settled, he makes a personal request. He wants to meet the Magic Tower Master, Sasha. Since this is within Maxim's power, he agrees without hesitation, especially since he recalls Oscar often discussing magic with the Master in the past. This surprises Oscar, as he didn't know the previous version of himself had spoken to Sasha. He now wonders what those conversations were about. Maxim tells him that the earliest he could meet Sasha would be in 6 months, coinciding with the White Night Festival. The reason for the delay is that Sasha is currently away on a business trip. Oscar finds it odd that the Master would take such a long time for what seems like a minor task. Maxim explains that since the High Mage is gone, Sasha has to take on their duties as well. Curious, Oscar asks about the Magic Tower Master's current level. Maxim reveals she's a level 7 High Mage. Oscar reflects on this, recalling that by her age he had already reached level 9. He believes that, given her abilities, she should be at least level 8 by now, so he wonders what's holding her back. The conversation shifts as Maxim mentions that the reports on the bodies from the recent deaths show an unnaturally clean cut. He asks Oscar if he's been practicing attack magic again. Oscar says he only trains when he feels like it. With that, the conversation ends, and Oscar leaves the Magic Tower. Just as he does, Vice Master Hamel arrives in Maxim's office. Hamel urges Maxim not to be too hard on Oscar, but Maxim feels that if Oscar gets into trouble, he deserves a scolding. Hamel, however, is worried about Oscar, especially since he brought him into the White Tower. Reflecting on their recent conversation, Maxim recalls how Oscar had managed to perfect a basic magic spell in just a few days. While it was a simple spell, it's nearly impossible to master something like that so quickly, which means Oscar must have been working very hard behind the scenes. Maxim reassures Hamel that Oscar is indeed a hard worker. After this, Maxim heads to an elders meeting where Elder Alina is already waiting. Meanwhile, Oscar walks through a greenhouse he had seen in a dream. The place is lush and calm. As he wanders around, he meets the caretaker of the greenhouse. The caretaker seems to recognize Oscar, but Oscar has no memory of him. When asked his name, the caretaker introduces himself as Will, the manager of the Magic Tower's facilities. He mentions hearing rumors about Oscar losing his memories and confirms that what he's heard is true. Oscar noticed that Will always addressed him as young Sir Oscar, instead of just calling him by his name. Curious, Oscar asked Will about it. Will explained that he had worked at the Magic Tower when the previous master, the great Sir Oscar, was in charge. He used the term young to differentiate between the two of them. Oscar then casually mentioned that he would like Will to be his conversation partner. While Will appreciated the offer, he hesitated, explaining that he wouldn't be able to stay much longer at the tower. After having worked there for 40 years, Will had seen 3 different masters come and go. All his old co-workers had left, and he was the only one from his generation still around. He stayed this long because of something the previous master had said during his appointment ceremony. The former master had told everyone in the tower that each of them was important, no matter their role. He encouraged them to live with pride as part of the Magic Tower. Will had taken those words seriously, dedicating himself to his work, believing he was an essential part of the tower. Oscar reassured him that it wasn't silly to feel that way. In fact, he admired Will's dedication. Despite the praise, Will had already decided it was time to leave. The Magic Tower had been struggling for a while. The building was falling apart, and the financial situation was even worse. Next month, Will would receive his long service award for his 40 years of service, but he wasn't sure he wanted it. Normally, after 20 years, workers were given a medal and a cash reward, and those who served for 40 years received a large sum of money. It was enough to buy a house in most cities, but the tower could no longer afford to give out such generous rewards. Some people would have to take risky jobs just to survive. Will didn't want to take money that the tower couldn't afford, especially when it was in such bad shape. To him, the Magic Tower had been like a second family, and leaving was hard. Oscar couldn't help but feel a lump in his throat when he realized how serious the situation was. He had previously thought that the Azure Tower, another magical institution, made questionable choices just to make money. But now he saw the truth. It wasn't the Azure Tower's fault. He had underestimated their hard work and success. The Azure Tower had earned their wealth, and that's why they were thriving. Meanwhile, Oscar had just a bunch of empty titles, which meant little if he couldn't even provide for those who had given so much to the Magic Tower. As Oscar continued to think about this, he suddenly noticed Will was holding his hand, which was bleeding. It looked like Will had clenched his fist so hard in frustration that his nails had cut into his palm. Even though Will was hurt, he didn't seem to mind much. Oscar is getting more anxious about Wilton's departure. Wilton mentions he still has 2 weeks left, but Oscar really wants him to stick around. He reassures Wilton that he'll figure out a way to get enough money so that no one has to leave the tower for financial reasons. Even though Oscar says all this, he's still feeling lost. He has no clear plan for making money. The first ideas that come to mind are working on lectures or commissions from his own income, but realistically, that's not going to fund an entire Magic Tower. Oscar, at his current low level, realizes the better option would be to start a business that could bring in a ton of cash. He thinks about making potions, but then gets a sudden realization, cutting to the Vice Tower Master's room. There, Lena, the one in charge of the tower's finances, is absolutely furious because of the recent issues they've faced. She's furious that they've ignored her suggestions, and even more upset by the blonde mage, who's being dismissive of the whole situation. The tension is high between the two, and even though they're both supposed to be the elders in the tower, they're arguing like children. The Vice Tower Master thinks Maximus is right, and they can't throw a kid into intense training without causing serious harm. But despite Lena's protests, the Vice Master insists they should use the child to pay a fine, which is 3 times the research fee, instead of going for something worse. Lena feels like they're being robbed, but she figures it's still better than the alternative. She vents about how low on funds they are and stresses the need to make a solid decision soon. The tower no longer needs some of the equipment for potion production, so selling it off would help them get by for a few months, at least. But even this plan doesn't sit right with the Vice Master. He argues that the White Magic Tower is a sacred place for learning, and he can't risk the future of the students just to handle their short-term financial issues. Lena snaps back, reminding him that they've been struggling for 2 decades and that hoping for some miracle to fix things is just unrealistic. The Vice Master hesitates to respond when, suddenly, someone knocks and enters. It's Oscar, the young genius with the black hair, here to speak with the Vice Master. Oscar isn't here for a simple chat. He's got a proposal. He wants help starting a business. Lena reacts with disbelief, basically saying, "You're broke, and now you want us to back your business idea?" She starts to complain about him again, especially since he had been caught mismanaging their funds before. But Oscar doesn't pay her any attention. He keeps pushing forward with his plan and mentions he read in the paper about a lockdown that's happening in a nearby estate due to a flu outbreak, hoping to use that as a springboard for his idea. The Vice Master heard the news and thought it could be linked to the Cadena flu, which is bad news for everyone. The Cadena flu is a serious issue because there's no cure for it. A long time ago, a special vaccine was made by the White Tower that could treat it, but that vaccine was destroyed 2 decades ago and all the research was lost. Oscar, however, has a plan. He believes he can create a new vaccine and sell it, bringing the White Tower back into the game as the only supplier of this crucial vaccine. Everyone in the room is shocked by his bold claim. It doesn't make sense that a 20-year-old would be able to do something that skilled researchers have failed to replicate for years. Alina, in particular, doesn't buy into Oscar's words. She thinks he's just making things up. But Oscar responds arrogantly, saying he's a genius, so it'll work out. This only angers Alina even more. She brings up how Oscar embezzled funds to buy a secretive potion for himself, showing just how clueless he is about the value of money. Before she can say more, the Vice Tower Master interrupts, suggesting that Oscar might be onto something big for the future of the White Magic Tower. He's essentially telling Alina to cool down. She reluctantly apologizes, realizing that her frustration might have been a bit much. Oscar understands that Alina's issue with him stems from his lack of action over the past couple of years, which hasn't helped his reputation. Regardless, Oscar keeps pushing forward with his plan, confident it's the key to their future success. He points out that the flu might actually be the Kadena flu after all, and he suggests that the Tower Master check the second page of the report to confirm it. They soon find out that Archbishop Baldwin had a change of plans. Initially, he was supposed to stay in Syrian for a month, but now he's been spending time in larger cities. This raises some suspicions. The order of worship, which includes 7 archbishops, is supposed to remain pure, but the process for becoming one requires collecting funds from the wealthy. Normally, the archbishops would stay in a place like Syrian to network with nobles and merchants. But Syrian is no longer as grand as it used to be, which doesn't quite add up. Maxim suggests that the Archbishop could be dealing with something related to prayers and blessings, but Oscar doesn't think that's a reasonable excuse, especially for a place like Syrian. There's a set route for the Archbishops, including places like Syrian, Mosque, Melbourne, Greenwale, and Vince. Oscar speculates that the Archbishop may have stayed in Knox for a while before heading straight to Theory City, adding to the mystery of what's really going on. Oscar figures that the Archbishop will stick around the mosque for another month, and then spend the last 2 months in the remaining cities. But something about that doesn't sit right. The sharp maid notices that the Archbishop seems to be avoiding Vince on purpose, dragging out his plans. This catches everyone's attention because, according to the higher-ups in the Altera Order, if something goes wrong during a pilgrimage, it's seen as angering the goddess of death. That reputation would ruin anyone trying to rise up to become a cardinal. Oscar starts wondering if the Archbishop knows about the Kadena flu outbreak in Vince and is stalling on purpose until things calm down. Although it's just a theory, the maid is really impressed by his sharp thinking. The Vice Tower Master thinks the same, but he can't offer Oscar any support at the moment. This is a big shock to Oscar, who thought he might get backing. The Vice Tower Master explains that helping Oscar right now would mean neglecting the other mages under him, which isn't a good idea. But here's the twist. The Vice Master believes in Oscar's business idea so much that he's willing to invest his own money to back it. Alina tries to stop him, saying it's too risky, but he's set on it. He offers Oscar 30,000 bells, which is the average monthly salary, but that amount feels tiny to Oscar compared to the huge task at hand. With a serious shortage of funds, Oscar starts to stress. He realizes he needs a backup plan. His new strategy is to make a small sample of the vaccine and give it to Archbishop Baldwin, then ask for a hefty sum in return. Since Baldwin's reputation is tied to his pilgrimage, he's likely to pay whatever it takes to keep things running smoothly. Oscar dives into his work, feeling good about the process so far. He's especially pleased with an energy drink he made as a test run. His assistant, Frank, is doing most of the heavy lifting, gathering ingredients. Thankfully, Oscar has a fatigue potion on hand to help out. The ingredients are top-notch, and Oscar is impressed by Frank's ability to find such high-quality stuff. He even jokes that Frank could be a merchant with his eye for quality. Frank mentions he's planning to leave once the tower is done for, which makes Oscar rethink his opinion of him. He used to think of Frank as just another kid, but now he sees he's sharp and useful. Oscar doesn't really need an assistant though, since he's fully capable of handling things himself. But the situation at the White Tower isn't great, with problems popping up left and right. If only everyone worked together to improve things, it could be so much better. Frank starts to get worried about the poisonous ingredients they're using, things like black lilies, red chams, and ghost mushrooms. Oscar reassures him, explaining that even poisonous ingredients can be used in medicine if handled correctly. The first step is to detoxify them by boiling them for 12 hours, but that comes with the issue of losing valuable nutrients in the process. Oscar has a better plan though. He asks Frank about a steaming technique from an old recipe that could detoxify the ingredients without losing their nutrients. By using this method, they can preserve about 98% of the original ingredients. With this method in mind, Oscar's confident that they'll be one step closer to cornering the market and making his business idea a reality. Frank wonders if the steaming process is the last step of detoxifying the ingredients, but Oscar explains that it's just the beginning. The ingredients only get softened in the steam. They still need a special spell to fully detoxify them. Oscar uses a unique spell to draw out the toxic essence from the steam, leaving behind pure, non-toxic vapor. Now, all that's left is to mix the ingredients back together to form the potion. After all the effort, the cure for the Cadena flu is finally made. Frank is stunned by how it turned out and is even asked to try it himself. But Frank knows he's not capable of pulling off what Oscar just did. He doesn't even know how to perform dual casting. Oscar watches Frank try the spell and sees some shaky control, but overall, the kid does better than he expected. Frank struggles to keep the spell going, but eventually reaches his limit. Oscar teases him for not being able to dual cast, and Frank points out how ridiculous it is to expect that from him when he hasn't even hit level 4 yet. Oscar then offers Frank a rare opportunity to learn the secret technique he used to dual cast. He explains that, to pull it off, you have to create separate areas in your brain. One part focuses on magic A and the other on magic B. Frank gives it a shot and, to his surprise, manages to dual cast successfully on his first try. It's much easier than he thought it would be. This makes Frank question why it's considered a secret technique if it's so easy to learn. Oscar reveals that it's a secret because the mages want to keep it that way. They don't want younger mages learning everything too quickly. They want them to work for it. Oscar sees this tradition as an obstacle in a power struggle. Techniques like dual casting are crucial in tough times, and right now, the White Tower needs fresh knowledge more than ever. Oscar is impressed with Frank's talent and ability to learn so quickly. With Frank now more eager than ever to serve him, they move on to the next step. Since they have a big steamer, it's time to use it to extract larger amounts of the herbs. After hours of hard work, Frank is exhausted, practically on his knees from the effort. But thanks to their dedication, they manage to make over 500 bottles of the potion. Just then, Elder Maxim bursts in looking panicked. He tells them that the Blue Tower is planning a meeting with the Archbishop, and it involves their pharmaceutical company. This is a huge problem because Maxim worries they might be too late to deliver the cure. Oscar realizes that their enemies are also making moves, and could end up sealing a deal with the Archbishop before them, which would ruin their plans. Maxim tries to comfort Frank, who's disappointed by the news, but Oscar refuses to give up. He remembers that the Cadena flu was declared a brand disaster, which means they still have one more option. Knowing Maxim's personal flight speed is faster than wagons, Oscar decides to pay someone a visit. The scene shifts to the Archbishop's quarters, where new guests from the Blue Tower arrive. Moira, a skilled mage, and Neil, the company's director, walk in to update Baldwin, who eagerly asks about the flu cure progress. Moira shares that they're making good progress, which is great news for Baldwin, who is keen on knowing when they'll be able to sell it. The problem, however, is that they still need to run more tests on the cure. Only after those trials are successful will they get permission to distribute it. Moira points out that this means it will take a while before they can officially start selling it. Baldwin is not happy to hear that it could take months, as he has big plans to leave in just a few months. His pilgrimage is important, and the delayed timeline is ruining everything. Just as Baldwin is about to lose his patience, a surprising visitor arrives. A maid enters with black hair and introduces herself politely. Baldwin is caught off guard and confused, as he wasn't expecting anyone from the White Tower, nor does he know who this person is. The maid introduces a young mage named Oscar, who claims to have a potential cure for the flu. This catches both Moira and Baldwin by surprise, especially when Oscar reveals he is there for the same reason as the Blue Tower, to offer a solution. Moira scoffs, thinking it's too late for Oscar to join the competition. Baldwin, still frustrated by the Blue Tower's slow progress, is intrigued by the possibility of something happening sooner. Oscar, relieved that Baldwin is interested, is quick to offer his services. Baldwin asks Moira, who is clearly upset, if the White Tower even has the resources to make something like this. Moira dismisses them, thinking the White Tower can't possibly have what it takes. Oscar, undeterred, opens a small wooden box and shows a potion inside. It's a sample of their product. Baldwin is impressed, and Moira, on the other hand, is shocked. Baldwin, eager to know more, asks about production, but Moira tries to interject, only to be shut down by Baldwin. The Blue Maid then remembers something important. Neither the White Tower nor the Blue Tower have the proper approval from the Empire to distribute medicine. Oscar confirms this. Moira arrogantly points out that the White Tower is no different from them and can't get approval either. The Blue Tower, however, would be more than happy to produce vaccines on a massive scale across the continent. Moira goes on, bragging about the Blue Tower's strong reputation in medicine and boasting that their vaccine will be far superior. Oscar, clearly fed up, interrupts and mocks Moira's overly confident attitude, pointing out how the Blue Tower's history doesn't guarantee anything in the face of real competition. This gets to Moira, and the tension in the room builds as the two mages exchange sharp words. Moira's face twists with anger as he demands Oscar to take back his words. But Oscar isn't the type to back down. He's ruthless and has no interest in staying quiet. Instead, he throws in a little history lesson, reminding them about the very first magic tower that was ever built. Moira scoffs, thinking it's ridiculous to make a fuss over a small time gap. But in reality, that short period changed everything. In just a few years, the White Tower had already achieved more than the Blue Tower could ever dream of in its entire existence. The air is thick with tension, but Oscar isn't done yet. He casually brings up how the White Tower once held a monopoly over the cure for a deadly disease just a couple of decades ago. The arrogant mages of the Blue Tower try to brush it off like it's irrelevant, but the truth stings. Moira tries to shift the conversation, acting like the past doesn't matter. But then something unexpected happens. A powerful wave of energy radiates from someone who shouldn't even be capable of such a thing. The pressure is overwhelming, and suddenly, Moira finds himself struggling to respond. Before the argument can escalate further, a servant rushes in with urgent news for the Archbishop. The Lord of Vince himself is calling. When the call connects, the Lord expresses his gratitude to Baldwin for sending them a life-saving cure. But there's just one problem. Baldwin never sent anything. Shocked, he listens, as it's revealed that an elder from the White Tower claimed to be acting on Baldwin's behalf, preparing the cure in secret, and it's working. The patients are recovering in just hours. To make things even worse for the Blue Tower, the Archbishop is loving this, calling it a blessing from the divine. Oscar watches their reactions with amusement. Moira, on the other hand, looks like he's about to pass out. There are no side effects, and the Lord of Vince is already asking for a second batch. It turns out that Elder Maxim left the final decision to the Archbishop, but Baldwin seizes control of the situation, confidently agreeing to send more. The call ends, and Baldwin, now in a fantastic mood, turns to Oscar, realizing he's the mastermind behind this. Moira, furious, yells about how all of this goes against their laws, but Oscar shuts him down immediately. If Moira wants a lesson, Oscar is more than happy to give him one, this time about war laws. Moira thinks Oscar is just trying to change the topic, but Oscar makes a cutting remark about how people have become too complacent. He then lays out the facts. More than 2 decades ago, a deadly event nearly wiped out humanity, not by swords or magic, but by a relentless disease. At that time, the mages scrambled to develop cures, while bureaucratic red tape delayed action. It was then that a new rule was put in place. In times of war, emergency treatments could bypass standard regulations. And since the current outbreak is classified as a disaster, that rule applies once again. Moira is speechless. The pharmaceutical company's director, desperate to find a loophole, suggests they could simply send their own cure and do what the White Tower did. But Baldwin laughs at their naivety. First, the White Tower already won, and second, the Lord of Vince is now completely convinced that the Archbishop is on their side. There's no going back. The company's CEO, seeing no other way out, even begs to lower the price to make their cure more appealing. But Baldwin slams his fist down, furious. Reputation isn't something that can be bought with money. The Archbishop, now fed up with their nonsense, dismisses them completely. And just like that, the psychological battle ends. The Blue Tower is left in shambles. utterly defeated. As Liam walks away, he silently vows to get his payback someday. But the funny thing is, our guy can't help but wonder what kind of dramatic speech that jerk practiced before saying something so cheesy. Meanwhile, Alex is already one step ahead. He's secured exclusive rights to the treatment. This means the rival company is completely stuck. If they want to sell the cure, they'll have to pay up, or their project is as good as dead. Liam is fuming, his anger hotter than a blazing fire. He storms out, his boss rushing after him, barely squeezing past Alex on the way. Alex quickly notices something odd about the guy. He has a distinct citrusy scent, just as expected. He found his target, but it wasn't the right moment to make a move. Instead, Logan, one of the higher-ups, gestures for Alex to sit down so they can continue their private talk. He's already impressed with Alex's work, but now wants to know the price. Logan then casually drops the amount their competitors were willing to pay, $500,000. Instead of settling for that, Alex confidently raises the stakes, asking for more than double, $1,200,000. Logan is stunned. A few hours later, Mia stares at the check in disbelief, a whopping $2,500,000. Alex just grins and confirms it's real. Overjoyed, his teammates tackle him in excitement, celebrating his genius move. Even their senior manager is baffled at how Alex managed to squeeze so much money out of Logan. Turns out, Alex had also factored in an extra fee, one to cover marketing costs. A clever move that made sure their company came out on top.